Good afternoon and good evening. Thank you for joining today's meeting. Today, we'll discuss about different approaches of program documentation. As you all know that documenting and sharing our learning is crucial for visualizing our work and also more importantly, for adapting from our learning. So there are so many projects ongoing in CCP and cross-learning does not happen always. So we thought that it will be a good opportunity for us to learn from different project perspectives. So today we invited 3 of our colleagues. First, we'll hear from Anne Cott, Senior Program Officer from Knowledge Success Project. She will talk about program documentation and learning. Then we'll have Moikali Kyoko, Senior Program Officer from Breakthrough Action Project. She will discuss about end of project reporting. And last but not the least, we'll have Stephanie Desmond, Director, Public Relations and Marketing at CCP. She'll talk about success stories. So during the presentation, please share your question on the chat. We'll have the Q&A session at the end of the meeting. So I'm very excited today to hear from our presenters. So let us hear from our first presenter, Anne Cott. So Anne, over to you.
Thanks, Charmaine. I'm happy to be presenting today. And before I go through my examples and presentation, I wonder if you could go to the next slide. And if we could just take a moment to share our own experiences as COP members. So we have 2 questions just to sort of start off this session on program documentation and learning. And one is just to ask everyone about your experience with program documentation and learning. So either let us know by raising your hand or by typing in the chat who today has contributed to program documentation and learning in some way. I see Elizabeth, Simone, Anne. And I'm sure there's many others, Moikali, of course. And would anyone be willing to share a challenge you faced in program documentation? You can either share it in the chat or take yourself off mute.
I'm happy to share one challenge in the documentation that we did at the end of the Tanzania Capacity and Communication Project, which was getting people to add, contribute in a timely fashion. It was never a priority for anybody.
Thanks, Elizabeth. That certainly sounds familiar.
This is Simone. A big challenge I've run into multiple times is that when a project is over, where to put the documentation. Sometimes having it just on CCP internal systems is fine, but if people want to keep it somewhere public, that can be really challenging if there is not a payment mechanism to take over some kind of paying a website bill.
Yes, that is definitely true, Simone. And I know we've gone through that together, and I'll get into that a little bit in my presentation. And thanks to everyone who's shared a little bit in the chat. I see your comment, Anne, about historical documentation. So I'll move forward to the next slide, but we just wanted to start off with getting a sense of where we all are as COP members. And these are some of the reasons that on Knowledge Success we cite for why we document programs and practices and help others. So it can be used to inform and improve future programming. We're helping to contribute to the global evidence base that others use around what works and what doesn't in programming. We can show our donors how we've had impact and sustainability over time. It prevents us from repeating mistakes or duplicating efforts, and it helps us to take the knowledge that's in our heads and codify it. Next slide. So who you're writing for influences what information you collect and how you present it, and donors and implementers obviously care about different things. Donors are looking at impact and how our work is aligned with their priorities. And Waikali and Stephanie will be presenting about ways to document programs for donors. And then implementers, our peers, are looking for details that can help them in their work. So they're looking for information on what went well, what you would do differently, your challenges, your lessons learned, and especially details. What we've heard repeatedly on Knowledge Success is that people feel information shared from other projects is often not practical or detailed enough, and also that it's biased because projects report only the successes. So implementers are looking for program documentation that's relevant and that is specific enough to apply to their context. Next slide. Program documentation, as we know, is about transferring knowledge. We are documenting information so that others can use it. And yes, Larry, absolutely, we will share these materials. And people go through what is essentially a customer journey on a daily basis while looking for information for their work. So here's an example. They may perform a Google search for a program resource. They review the search results. They pick the one that seems to be a good fit. They review that resource and they decide whether to keep reading or to go back to their search results. And knowledge marketing is a framework that I created for our knowledge success work. So it adapts this sales funnel or customer journey, which traditionally includes 4 stages of awareness, consideration, decision, and loyalty. And when applied to program documentation, knowledge marketing helps us to conceptualize a KM product that meets people's needs and design it in a way that ensures people will use it and find it useful enough to recommend to others. So next slide. There's a spectrum of ways that we can document program insights and lessons learned, and none of these listed here are better than another. They are all useful for specific audiences and specific needs. More detailed program documentation products like learning briefs and implementation guides are especially useful when you want to share specific step-by-step details on how you implemented a program. They're useful if you're writing for technical advisors or individuals who have time built into their workday to research program implementation ideas and best practices. Some of the products with less detail, like implementation stories or videos, can be useful if you're writing for program managers who we know feel overwhelmed by the amount of information being sent at them and the lack of time they have to get through everything. So a short story or a video with key highlights from your program may be all they need to get inspiration for their own work. So if you're like me, this list is useful to see, but I also really appreciate seeing the examples. So in the next few slides, I'm going to share some of my favorites from across this spectrum. So next slide, please. This great how-to guide was created by the Institute for Reproductive Health at Georgetown University by Pathfinder and Save the Children. And they created it to show others how to recreate the GREAT project, which aimed to promote gender equitable attitudes and behaviors among adolescents and communities in northern Uganda, with the goal of reducing gender-based violence and improving sexual and reproductive health. It's a terrifically detailed resource that goes step-by-step through how to implement the project, and it even includes templates, and you can see it is very long. It's 214 pages. Next slide. Another example of detailed documentation is Learning from Zika, which is a synthesis report that Ann Ballard-Sarah, Sophie Weiner, and I completed at the end of USAID's Zika response. This was an interesting documentation exercise because it wasn't focused on one project, but instead documented the work of all USAID Zika implementing projects and partners in order to draw out insights and lessons learned. So to create this report, which ultimately ended up being 16 pages, we reviewed 91 documents, which included project briefs, work plans, annual reports, presentations. We also documented insights during a share fair and had further discussions with partners at regional and working group meetings, and then coded the information along 6 themes. So this final report, which you see here, which was designed by Sophie, includes 16 insights that could be applied to future programs. Next slide. Our colleague Sarah Harlan led the development of this learning brief, which is an example of program documentation in project communities several years after official funding has ended. HOPE LBB was implemented in Kenya and Uganda from 2011 to 2019, and Sarah led a stock taking exercise to document continued implementation of the activities, to report on the status of activities, to identify challenges and opportunities, and to outline recommendations to improve scale up and sustainability of current and future programs similar to HOPE LBB. And so this learning brief included a desk review, a focus group discussion, and 17 in-depth interviews. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice. The next slide, please. So Rowena, Liz Tully, Sophie, and I developed a series called What Works under Knowledge Success, which provides an in-depth essential elements of impactful programs. So this is an interactive web page, which is very different than the examples we've seen. This uses interactive design to address some of the barriers that traditionally discourage people from creating or using documentation products that share this level of detail. So as an interactive web page, all the information is on one page. You don't have to navigate anywhere else. It breaks down comprehensive program documentation into pieces of micro content, which is short, visual, useful tidbits that can be consumed in under a minute. So this allows readers to explore the details at their own pace. And they can also quickly navigate to the key aspects that are of interest to them. Next slide. The IBP implementation stories, some of you may be aware of. These are also written product, but a little bit shorter. These were developed with IBP, along with our colleagues Ann Ballard, Sarah, and Sarah Harlan. Each implementation story is 6 pages long. It includes quotes and images, details on implementation, challenges faced, efforts to use WHO guidelines and other tools, and it also includes lessons learned. And then finally, Family Planning Voices. Our team created this 6-page infographic that focused less on implementation details, but instead showed how storytelling could be used to impact knowledge, attitudes, beliefs, and practices in the family planning community. So these are all examples of the types of program documentation you could do in your work or could counsel others to share. Thank you, Carlene. I will definitely send links to all of these things. So if we go to the next slide, I just wanted to go back to that knowledge marketing framework and give you some ideas and examples of how you can use this to develop products that are useful and used. So at the beginning, thinking about making it easy for someone searching for information to find your resource by optimizing the content for search engines. So this means making sure the title and content use terms that are commonly used by the audience you're writing for, and also including elements like a table of contents or descriptive video summary that make it easy to see what's covered in your documentation product. Next, making it easy for people, particularly if this is a text product, to scan your resource. So using bullets, call-out boxes, bolded text, and also translating it into languages that are commonly used by the audiences you're trying to reach. Assuming that they have scanned through your document and decided that it's going to be really useful for your work, you can also think through how to make it easier for you to retain the knowledge that they're reading. So that might include, if you have a lot of examples written out in text, that you could also use graphics that illustrate those text examples as a way to sort of support what you're saying through text. And then finally, and this sort of relates to what Simone was saying at the beginning, have a distribution plan for once you create this documentation product, how will people be able to continue to find it and share it with others? So knowing where it's going to live online and ideally having a home for it that will be a long-term home. Making sure to share it through social media. Oh yes, of course, Larry. I'll slow down, my apologies. Making sure to share it through social media. And also printing copies for distribution so that even if someone is not trying to find a resource online, they might be able to pick it up in person through either a conference or a relevant meeting. And my final slide is just to share with you a template to get started. This is our knowledge success content brief, which we use with many different audience members. to help people think about what they would want to write and discuss. So it walks through questions about your audience. It asks for you to think through critically why you're creating the documentation product. It outlines some questions for your technical considerations, so regarding the content that you'll be covering, and then also some editorial considerations, thinking through appropriate tone, thinking about how your audience's location might impact how you frame your documentation piece, and helping you think through if there are elements that are best shown in a visual format. And I will also share this link as well. So that is the end of my presentation. And Larry and my other French-speaking colleagues, I'm sorry if I went too fast, but I will definitely share all of the examples. And of course, we have questions at the end. So back to you, Charmaine and Moikali.
Thank you, Anne, for this excellent presentation. I think we can take one or two questions now. If, I mean, we have a little bit time here, so if anyone wants to ask any question. And if you see any question on the chat.
Yes, Anne, you asked if there are any examples in French. So of the examples I shared, any from Knowledge Success are also translated into French. And the interactive web page, which was produced with our West Africa Breakthrough Action colleagues, was originally created in French and then translated into English. So many of them will be available in French, bien sûr.
Thanks. I see one hand raised. Manuela,
Yes.
go ahead, please.
Yes, it is more an insight, my view now. But when I look at that, I'm not like, but this is something that we may have while beginning a project. In fact, that is when you are involving or you are starting a project, you may have this because at the end you have to produce something. This can guide you in the way you are maybe leading the process or leading, keeping some information because we know that they are really important. So, I mean, this is something which is, like I said, it's just an insight. So that's what I wanted to share.
I'm not sure, Anne, did you get the question?
Yes,
It was
Manuela.
not a question. Let me just make a mistake. Are you getting me better? Are you getting me?
Yes.
What I was saying is that it was more an insight than a question. When I look at it, I was like, it is good having this at the very beginning of the project because this can enable you to focus or to take a particular attention when you are keeping elements that are supposed to enter into the documentation that you want to, the kind of document that you want to build or develop. So it was not actually a question, it was just an insight. And as I was saying, I could be wrong on the place which this document should, I mean, be placed or not.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for comment. So we'll go to the next presentation and please send your question through the chat. We'll cover those at the end. So Mona, if you can add the question on the chat, we are planning to go to the next presentation. So next we'll have Moikali, and she will talk about more about the managing the process of end of project documentation. So over to you, Moikali.
Great. Thanks so much, Charmaine. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. First, a big thanks to the KMCOP chairs for focusing on this topic, documentation, success stories, and end of project documentation processes. It's just feeling very timely. And thanks so much for that great presentation. There were a lot of extremely useful resources in there. So thank you very much. So I'm going to shift gears a bit and talk about managing the actual end of project documentation process. So if you are someone within a team who has been asked to write the end of project report or think about the different types of products to be developed for your team's work as the project comes to a close, these are some tips and tricks for you. And I'm really grateful for the experiences that I gained from supporting project closeouts and documentation processes under Knowledge for Health, supporting the BA Guinea team to do it when they thought they were in closeout, and currently working with the Breakthrough Action Nigeria team as they are thinking about the types of learnings that they want to document as we approach the end of the project. Next slide, please. So similar to Anne, I'd like to kick us off with a couple questions. The first one is, has anyone contributed to any part of the end of project reporting process? Whether you have led the process, whether you've written part of the end of project report or reviewed, has anyone been part of that process? Feel free to raise your hand or just pop it in the chat. Okay. I imagine a few of us have. And the second question I have is there a lesson, or what is one lesson you've learned about how to manage the process so it goes as smoothly as possible? Feel free to unmute yourself, or yes, do not wait until the project ends. That's right. Start early and have a good outline. Yep.
Also, keep in mind that the end of project report often happens at the same time as the final year progress report. So if you can do the final year report first, then you have chunks that you can move into the end of project.
Thanks, Simone. Ooh, awesome. Yes, these are all great. These are all great. And you're preempting what's in the tips and tricks. Thanks. All right. Thanks, everyone. Anne, is your hand up?
Oh, no, I have to take it back down. That was for your first question.
All right, great. Okay, thanks. All right, let's jump into the top 10 tips and tricks if you have been assigned to take this on. One of the first things that you do want to do as a team is really think about the roles and responsibilities. It's going to be really, really important to designate a project manager. This is going to be, as Bill Glass says, the chief czar or czarina, the person who's going to manage the entire process, who's going to set deadlines, make sure the team stays on track. This is going to be the person who also keeps documents organized and communicates with different members of the team who contribute to the process. One thing about this person is that they may or may not be one of the writers for the products, and that would be decided based on whether that person has the skill set to do it. And then other roles and responsibilities. Think about who the writers are going to be. Do you want to get an external writer, or does that skill exist within the team and someone can do it? Who's going to provide input to the content and the process? Who the reviewers are going to be. A really, really important one is deciding and knowing at the beginning who gives the final sign off on the report or different products. Comms team play a key role within the process. So if you are on the BA project, getting in touch with Marcella and her team as early as possible. And also making sure that you have identified who your designers are going to be so they can help with the design and layout processes. Next slide. The second thing that's really important to do is to sit with your team and have a conversation or a series of conversations to help them set the focus and to think about what it is that we want to highlight. The unfortunate thing is many of us think and believe, and it is true, all of our project work is really important, but we can't highlight it all. And we really need to focus on what will be most important to highlight based on the objectives and the audience that we determine together. So having a sit down with your team or several sit downs to understand what they view as the objectives for the process and the story they want to tell. Linking back to Anne's presentation, thinking really critically about our audience and what it is that we want them to do when they receive the information that we share with them. What are their priorities and what is the type of information that they want? And then for us as a team, it's important to think about what is it that has been important to us and what do we think our most impactful learnings have been? And where have we been most successful in achieving our goals and objectives? I should add based on what Anne said, we often don't also talk about failures and lessons learned, so also thinking about those. Next slide, please. Right, and then tying it together. So after you've had those conversations with your project teams to determine the overall objectives and audience and impactful learnings, you will have a list of a lot of items. So thinking through what the overarching themes will be to organize your story. Identify the themes, look at the themes that have come out of the discussions that you've had and organize them. One way to organize them is around the project strategies, goals, and objectives. For example, thinking through the breakthrough action strategic pillars. As your teams talk about what they are doing, how do they align to the overall strategic pillars that the 7 pillars of breakthrough action, and how do they align to the donor priorities? Next slide. All right, going back to Anne's presentation, deciding on the products. For many of us, there is the end of project report that needs to be done, but for many of us, there's also opportunity to create another package of products. They don't need to be done at the end of the project, but they could be tied to that. So going back, always thinking about the audience and the objectives and how they want to receive the information. And then again, remembering focus, demand, sacrifice. Think about your resources, think about the time that you have, think about the availability of people to write the content and the budget that's available for these products. And having a discussion with your team during the brainstorm sessions will be important. Sharing examples with them. And Anne, thank you for what you have shared with us, because this can be a really great tool to share with them to see what is possible and get their reactions. But also being really clear with your team about the amount of time it takes, and also getting clarity around the objectives and the audiences. So taking some time early on to think about, is it going to be a single end of project report, or are we going to have a suite of products accompanying this? Next slide. All right, a lot of people said this, start early, and maybe this should have come as tip number 1 or 2. Set your timeline very early. It takes a whole lot more time than you think. Building in that time for writing and reviewing and the back and forth, and reminding team members of what the objectives and audiences are. Do not forget the time that's required for copy editing, and also the time that's required for design and layout. if developing a single end of project report, I'd suggest 6 months. That may be not enough time, but at least thinking about 6 months. And if you're thinking about developing a suite of products, I would suggest 18 months to 2 years. Within the Breakthrough Action Nigeria team that's scheduled to close out in 2025, we are beginning the process now. Next slide. All right, work with your project comms team. They are here to help you and support you. Have the conversation as early as possible. They should be one of the groups that you brainstorm early with. Marcella, me, and Rebecca on BA are extremely helpful. Stephanie Desmond and her team also have some suggestions. Working with them very early on to talk about your needs, your time frame, and to see how they can support. They've got great ideas. And just to make a pitch for the comms request form on Airtable for BA. Next slide. Right, working with a designer will be really important, especially if you do not have the skill set on your team with folks who can design and lay out and have the time to do it. Marcella has contacts with designers who have worked with CCP before that you can reach out to. Also recommend having a kickoff call early in the process with them. Designers don't necessarily know the context that we operate in and need as much information as possible early on. Share with them different types of products that you'd like. Describe, what types of infographics you'd like by the numbers, maps, the types of images of people that you would like. Organize everything in a way that they would want, whether it's sharing a link to Google folders or Dropbox, and then being very clear about where each resource should be placed within the report. We've worked with designers who are really creative with inserting both sites, images, but also sounds within the report, and have been really helpful with that. Know that build a very good relationship with your designer, and know that there will be a lot of regular communication, especially at the end. Become friends with him or her, because you will need them to make a lot of changes at the end, and will be asking for their grace and patience. Next slide. All right. Getting organized as early on as possible. Set up some shared libraries, start collecting your best photos, logos, campaign images, and other products now, sight sounds. Make sure that all photos are in high resolution and start to collect the captions. If you don't have access to good photos, you really need to get good photos, and your budget allows for it. Do a trip and see if the team can collect some photos. They really can make or break your products. And then just set a deadline with the team on when photos and other products need to be collected. Next slide. Right. It's going to be really important to have the launch kickoff call that's separate from the brainstorming sessions. And this call allows the team or you as the project manager to just talk about the process and assign responsibilities. Just make sure the team knows that this is what we're doing and this is what we're committing to do. Make sure that everyone is on the same page on the audience and objectives that you had decided on. And also in terms of the timeline, talk about the different ways you would want to stay in touch, whether in writing or during meetings, so that everything can stay on track. And the last tip, next slide. Just a few other considerations. Please make sure the content is finalized, including the copy edit, before it goes to the designer. It is not an easy, process to edit content once the designer has started the layout process. Be really, really clear at the get-go on who needs to sign off and has the final word on the okay and green lighting the report. And then making sure that this person, whether it's the chief of party, whether it's the team lead, whether it's the project director, has time allocated for this. And that they have a really good understanding that they need to give the green light before it goes to the designer, and should review the content before it goes to the designer. And then finally, the project manager role is really, really key. So making sure you have that person on the team will be really important. This is the person, again, who is the czar or the czarina, and sets deadlines and make sure that everybody stays on track so that the reporting and document and products can be completed on time. Next slide. And that is it. Thank you very much. Any questions?
Thank you, Moikali, for presenting the whole process of documentation. And I would like to say that Moikali also have a Hive article on end of project reporting. You can also see that. So I think we just have, we can take one question now, then we have to go to the next presentation. So one question we can take now. Moikali, do you see any question on the chat?
No, I do not.
Okay, if no question now, then I think we can discuss on the Q&A session. So I'm gonna go. So our next presenter is Stephanie Dejman. So she'll talk about success stories. So Stephanie, over to you now.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. My colleague and Anne, you guys have really done an excellent job with your presentations here. I've learned a lot. The first thing I wanted to say is that I was asked to talk about success stories, but the first thing I wanted to say is that success story means a bunch of different things. So I look at them through the lens of, you know, using the CCP website, using the CCP social media accounts to share really interesting stories about our successes and the impacts we've made. There is an official USAID success story, which has specific parameters, but this is sort of a general discussion of sort of how we share our success through stories. Next, please. Oh, before I start, I also want to thank Rebecca Pickard, who helped me with these slides. So this is what I want to know in a story. Tell me why it matters. So you can have, you know, this interest, you can have this fact that's really interesting to you. You can have a finding that's really interesting to you. But in order for us to sort of get a broader set of eyeballs on it who are interested, is we need to say, this is why it matters. So to almost think about that as, it's not a sentence in your story, but think about it as a sentence in your story. Why this matters, why you're telling me this. The why is so important in any story that you tell. So these are the different formats that we use to share our success. As I said, CCP blog posts, USAID's success stories, project blog posts, and social media. So not everything needs to be a story, and not everything needs to be a blog post, but everything. So if you have some fabulous pictures and just a caption with them, we can really blow it up on Instagram or LinkedIn and really make it make it stand out for people who will just see the picture and they'll get a real quick flavor of what kind of great stuff we're doing. So what makes a good story? So these points are just really basic. So, you identify the issue, you identify a program element that we use to address it, and then you talk about the impact. I think it's crucial that we talk about not only why, because we talked about that, but also what kind of impact we've made. It can be a very small impact. I mean, we wrote a story about a project in Nigeria that helped a community build a very small little bridge so that they could make it to the health center much more easily. But think about that small little story. Think about the impact it has on people, right? It's just a, they can now get where they couldn't before. And so these even tiny stories like this really are an interesting way to get into the stories that we have to share and the successes that we've had. So this is also something that's pretty interesting. So your goal here is to tell a good story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. And really that's it, So think about it as if you were telling your neighbor about what you're working on. You wouldn't get into all the technical details of everything. You would give sort of general explanations that were understandable to lots of different people, that are accurate, of course, but that they are not going to be too technical as to overwhelm. We just want, think about a newspaper story that you might read. They have the good ones have a beginning, middle, and end. They wrap up all the little things you really need to know when you're done. And so that's a really great way to think about it. So what's in the story? So these are just sort of ideas of what you could put in, what a story can be, right? So a program story, what works, also what doesn't work. Tell the story of why you, for example, created what the problem was, which is why you created this amazing intervention that did amazing things. Something new, introduction of a tool or resource, or really just something we've never really read before or written about before. We are innovating all the time at CCP. And I think it's great to sort of think about, a lot of us have been here a long time and don't necessarily think of their stories as so interesting. But I think if you take a step back and you think, this actually was really cool, we hadn't done it this way before, for example, I think that's a great way to sort of think about the work and think about what you want to share in a success story. Insights, obviously, profiles of individuals. That content on our staff actually does really well on social media channels. So we'd love to see more of that. And I also love profiles of individual people. I mean, we just did a story recently about COVID vaccine ambassadors. And I want to say it was Bangladesh, but I could be wrong. But just a sort of a story of this person and how their story was. I'm sorry, my email keeps pinging at me. So just sort of hear from, just sort of see a personal story of how things have been transformed. And then of course, technical content where we try to share that as well. So that, and again, but we try to share it in really simplified ways so that we can bring in more people and more eyeballs. Next. And again, we go back to why. So building awareness. Why tell the story? We want to build awareness. We want to connect people with information. We want to give them an action to take. These are all sort of intertwined with what makes a good story. So knowing your audience is so important here. I can't sort of stress that enough. So the blogs are for everyone who finds the CCP website. I'm talking about the CCP website success stories, which we have many of them. And I believe that that's exactly what USAID wants as well. So you need to write for your audiences who might not understand even basics of SBCC or knowledge management. Exactly what we do. I still find myself explaining what we do to a lot of people when I get into conversations with them about the work. So frame the piece as using an issue that speaks to different readers. Please avoid jargon and keep things short and catchy, and try to write sort of in a style that, for example, I like to sometimes to punch up a story, I'll use different sentence lengths that sort of helps the reader to sort of pay attention to different points that you're making. And I know that this was brought up earlier. Don't forget the photos, but we need photos as well. And but we know that you guys can take them, right? So, you know, everyone's got a camera in their pocket, mostly everyone. And, you know, we want to take pictures of people's faces. We want to focus on people, not on, as we see, large groups of people, like when they're sitting around at a meeting. Think about these, the photos as the entry to the story. And so if you have a really great picture, it gives a great entry right into the story and people want to read more. And make sure you send highest resolution photos that you have. I also want to say that, you know, my colleague was talking about how they plan for documentation, you plan months and months and months in advance. These are much more, we don't wait till the end of the project necessarily, although we do write blog posts about those, but we also like to jump in and grab a great story from what's going on right in the moment. And these things can be turned around very quickly within days and weeks. So think of these as just sort of giving a taste of what's going on, and then you'll tell the whole story with your final product. So these are bonus points, right? If great pictures, it's the best. I mean, it doesn't always happen, but when we get those kinds of photos, it really makes everything look really upset everyone's game. A great little quote from someone who's doing, you know, who's in the story, like or one of the people who are the beneficiaries, which I think is not not the right word, from somebody who is benefiting from the intervention that's being done, or someone who's creating the intervention. A short, high quality video is amazing if we have it. Again, we don't always have these things. This is kind of like the wish list bonus points. So if we have them, then it's great. And if we don't, that's okay too. And here's just some examples of some blog posts we've done recently. There's the bridge story I was telling you about, building a bridge to boost health clinic visits in Nigeria. There's Malawi, we work, you know, communities working together to raise malaria awareness, which of course you can read these things, and then there was an interesting study that someone had done about how vaccine rates had risen in Nigeria, and we talked about the CCP campaign that was probably instrumental in some of that. All right, so I'm not going to get into the rest of these because I'm running out of time, but the key to a lot of this is keeping it brief. And when I say that, I don't mean super, super short. We can run things that are 600, 800, even 1,000 words on occasion. But what's very important is to sort of make sure that you're going over everything. You know, you're reading everything and you're saying, do I need to include this? Or can I say this sentence in much fewer words? So there's always small ways to keep things brief. And if you're paying attention to the writing, which I know you are, it will happen over time. Like you'll realize that's an extraneous word, or this concept can be described much more simply than this. And so, you know, I think it was Mark Twain who said, I would have written it short, but I ran out of time. I didn't have enough time. So it's really easy to just write everything, you know, throw it on the page and send it over. But if you really just think clearly about keeping it brief, have it in the back of your mind to keep it brief, you can say a lot more things than you even realize. So that's it for me for now. If anyone has questions. Mona?
Me for sharing this nice presentation. Mona, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Stephanie. I'm actually working on some success stories, so this was perfectly timed. Thank you so much for this great presentation. I had two questions for you. One was, any tips on, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, I just had like a little pop-up screenshot. Do you have any tips on finding sort of catchy titles? Because I found that when the title is kind of catchy and you're reading a success story, it kind of pulls you in a little bit on that first glance. And then my second question is, how important is it to show some generalizability in your story or activity? Is that an important piece to sort of focus on when you're creating a success story?
Mona, thanks for your questions. They're good ones. So writing a headline is hard. Like, it's really hard. And so I think you just sort of think a little bit about what grabs your attention, like what and I really do mean this, like, what, what would you tell your neighbor? What's like the first thing you tell them? And so that typically you can find something to mold from that. Also, sometimes there's like a great short quote that really epitomizes the entire thing, and that's sort of a great thing to use as a headline. And the second question was about generalizability, correct? I think in USAID success stories, they very much want those. And I think that that's an element that I would love to have in mine. But not everything is generalizable. And in fact, sometimes we say this isn't, it isn't generalizable, but I think that, if that's even a word, but I think that I think it's good to aim for, especially with the USAID success stories.
Thank you, Mona. So I see a lot of nice comments and linked colleague sharing. Thank you for sharing those links. And I'm not sure if I am missing any questions. So anyone have a question, please go ahead, unmute yourself. We'll share these resources on the Hive so that you can get to it later. Any question from anyone, or any comment or any suggestion?
I have a question. This is Gabrielle. It's kind of to everybody. One thing that struck me that Ann Cott mentioned was around how there's this perception that a lot of end of project documentation is biased, and that it focuses on successes and leaves out some of the challenges or even failures. And I wonder if anyone has any thoughts on how we might approach that approach reporting on challenges and failures or difficulties in end of project reporting. Just any tips or ideas on that?
Great question. So Anne, you'd like to add something? Or more, Kelly?
Yeah, I'd be happy to add, Charmaine, but I also wanted to see if anyone else wanted to chime in.
Yeah, sure.
Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, I was just asking if anyone has experience with reporting on challenges, failures, difficulties in end of project reporting, just coming back to what Anne mentioned, that there's a critique that so much of end of project reporting is biased and that it only talks about successes.
I mean,
So
go ahead.
No, go ahead, Stephanie.
Yours is more relevant, I'm sure, please.
Well, I was going to say, Gabrielle, I think that one of the challenges is that it can sometimes be very donor dependent. And I will say for us at CCP, USAID seems to be very much coming around and to an extent embracing sharing more of the challenges and failures. And under Knowledge Success, we've done a lot of research around how to frame failure, and I'm happy to share those links too. And there, we worked with our partner, Busara Center for Behavioral Economics, to look at how we might be able to frame failures in a way that's more palatable to all of us and to our donors. But I think also sometimes it can be really helpful just to present them in context. So if you're just reading about what didn't work, First of all, it can be really hard to write that, and it doesn't always give the full context of once you did experience a mistake or a hiccup in your programming, how did you pivot? And so what we've also found is just, and I think at the end of project reporting, if you, it can sometimes help to share what didn't work, but then how you adapted. And that can also make it more palatable to donors. So those are my thoughts. And again, I can share those links if that's helpful.
Thank you. Anyone would like to add anything with this or any other comment? Yeah, so Gabriel is saying that the link would be nice. So we can share those links and so, I mean, we are almost at time, so we'll post this on the Hive and we can continue our discussion on the Hive. I think Mona has a question. Do you really have AI taking notes of the meeting? I don't know. What do you?
I just saw that we have Firefly's AI note taker as one of the attendees. So do we actually have AI on this? That's kind of cool.
No, actually, we could not figure out who that is.
All right, thanks, Charmaine.
Welcome. So we'll have our next meeting during the worldwide meeting time. So please look for that invitation. And if you have no other questions, so please look at the CoP Hive page. So we'll share all the resources, presentation and recording from today. And thank you very much, everyone. Oh, I think Elizabeth, go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to just really thank all the presenters. And as I was listening in, I was like, oh, we really need this set of presentations for the chiefs of party and team leaders on breakthrough action, given the timeliness of all of it. So I have reached out to Anna Helland, who organizes those monthly meetings, and I'm hoping our presenters might be willing to do a reprise, but Anna will be following up. So thank you all. It's meant as a huge compliment and great appreciation. Thanks.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And thank you all the presenters for presenting all those nice tips and tricks. So we'll see you all in the next meeting. Take care. Goodbye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Great.